Hey everyone, welcome back to the Improv TX Comedy Network. If this is your first time checking out the podcast network, we appreciate it. Please head over to your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, or iTunes, and give the Improv TX Comedy Network a like. And just a reminder, the Improv TX Comedy Network is live on YouTube with all your favorite comedians on the improv stage. All links can be found in the description. And with that, on to the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Act Out. From open mic to the big stage, comedians tell us how stories were made. I am Duck. Today I have a very special guest. This guy, not only is he a comedian, but he is a doctor. That is crazy. A doctor of psychology and neuroscience, correct?
Kinda, yeah. It's the same thing. Psychology, the concentration in neuroscience.
Not only that, he's an author. He goes across the country doing seminars, is that correct?
That's right, that's right.
And his comedy is great. And I want to talk about the story, how you went from one to the other, because it's super interesting. But we have Dr. Brian King on here today. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's really good to be here, actually. Yeah, super good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So the story kind of plays into this, but how long have you been on comedy? Since 2009?
Yeah, I forget exactly what year I started. I think it was around then, 2009, 2010 or something like that. I would say over 10 years I've been doing comedy, minus the pandemic, But I started in San Francisco. I was living there, working in a field that I didn't quite care for, and I had always wanted to be a comedian my whole life. But I kept putting it off. I don't know why. I had different reasons for why I put it off. If I backtrack a little bit, I'll tell you, I went to college in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
So I'm not from Texas, but I ended up here and I went to college here. And the entire time throughout my college years, I remember wanting to be a stand-up comedian. That's something I really wanted to do. I love comedy. I was a funny person. People would say, hey, you should try comedy. I'm like, yeah, I should. But I was focused. I was as focused as I could be, having ADHD, but I was focused on getting out of college, So Comedy Club opened up in Austin, the Velveeta Room on 6th Street. We already had Capital City Comedy Club out in what used to be far away from town. Now it's, because Austin's grown so much, it feels like Capital City is still like in the interior. But they opened up and I started hanging out there, and the comedians that formed in the early days would encourage me, and I'd say, hey, when are you going to get up? When are you going to do something? Do a set? And I just didn't feel ready. I didn't have any idea what I would talk about,
So you would just hang around the comedy club?
I was a comedy fan. Every comedian starts out as a comedy fan.
Yeah.
So I would hang out and watch the shows and stuff. But and I would be encouraged, which was kind of nice. That comics I would talk to would encourage me to get on stage. But I wasn't ready. And for some reason, something inside me told me I wasn't ready. And I didn't think I had anything to talk about if I got on stage, I had this misconception that you had to step on stage with all your material already prepared and well written and so forth. But, how do you get to that point? You got to get on stage first,
Yeah.
So that was the thing that was missing for me. So I pushed it. And then I moved a couple times. I ended up getting accepted into graduate school because I got a degree of psychology from UT, and then I went to graduate school, and then I got a PhD, and then I got a job, and then so this progression of events in my life just kept postponing my desire to be a comedian, but I never left it. I'd always tell people at every stage of my life, I was like, yeah, one of these days I want to try stand-up comedy, and then I got to San Francisco, and I was working at a job I didn't really care for. It was secretly making me kind of miserable. I was really stressed about it. I was working long hours and stuff, and it just wasn't a good fit for the environment, And one day I was walking down the street in San Francisco. A friend of mine, after work, we were walking, and we pass a sign that says, like stand-up comedy night or open mic night or something like that. And she turns to me. She says, didn't you always say you wanted to be a comedian? I said, yeah. And he's like, well, why don't you give it a shot? I couldn't figure out a reason to say no. And so I got on stage, started performing, and I was immediately hooked. And I tell you, never postpone your dreams. Because as soon as I started doing it, I was kicking myself. I was like, why didn't I do this back in Austin in the Velveeta Room when things were ripe? When I was younger, and you know what I mean? Like,
you went that first time. You didn't prepare anything. It was
I think I had a couple of ideas in my head. They were probably pretty bad, and they were probably based on comedy that I'd seen on TV. Comedians talk about airlines, they talk about traveling. They talk about that one room in Winnemucca that they worked and how it was a tough room or whatever. That's typical stuff that you see from stand-up comics. And so I think I went in on that mindset, like try to, do my version of that stuff. I don't remember any of it doing very well. I did get some laughs, but I got a solid rush. And I realized from that point forward, like I just wanted to do that. I wanted to be a comedian. And I started focusing heavily on doing comedy, and so I started late. Best time to be a stand-up comic, the best time to start comedy is like when you're 15, 16.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, it really is. Look at Chris Rock, look at all these other
like
people.
Chappelle,
Started young, The second best time is as soon as you can. You know what I mean? Like I can't go back in time and tell my teenage self, look, you got to start writing down these jokes. You got to form an act. You got to, develop a personality. But, so what? I was a little late to the game. Big deal. I mean, Roseanne started late, Rodney Dangerfield started late. It's encouraging that anybody can get on a comedy stage and just do it. So I decided that I would do it. I would put effort into it. I loved it. I loved it more than anything else I was doing. I loved it more than that job I had. I lost that job about a month after becoming a comedian. And part of it was because I wanted to do comedy every night. He's like, boss is like, hey, I need you to stay late for this. I'm like, oh, you know what? I've got an open mic that I'm promised I'm going to get 5-minute set, and I need to bail, Yeah. And it really was. It was your passions become your commitment. And I was never really committed to what I was doing to support myself at that time. In fact, I really didn't like it. Not that comedy was presenting a better option, but it was definitely something I was really passionate about. So I decided to pursue it. And I started, doing it on a regular basis all around San Francisco.
And what's great about that is, like you said, you started late. And you were already established with a job, a career, doctorate, everything. And it's kind of fun that you're saying, like, this wasn't bringing me joy. I followed the path that they wanted me to follow, or I set, but the true path was over here.
Right.
And that's great. And I started late too. I started comedy when I was 36, I think. Yeah, it's harder. Like, I see these young bucks coming up and I'm just like, man, all that wasted time. But I was afraid. It was pure fear of getting on the stage. I was going to ask, the first time you went up, were you nervous?
I might have been a little nervous. I hadn't had many public speaking appearances in my life. A couple occasions where I was asked to give a toast to a crowd, or something like that, or say a few words at this or a that, and I would be over. I would get flushed red. The nerves would kick in. But I don't know that I was necessarily prohibitively nervous that first time. I kind of went out and maybe I used the nerves in my favor. I don't remember my first set very well. I didn't have a camera on. I didn't record it. My second set is the one that I have a camera on. I'm recording. Then I just feel like an old pro. But I don't remember how nervous I was, but it was awkward. It was awkward, but it was comfortable because I did it at a place called the San Francisco Comedy College. It wasn't like a bar, it wasn't a comedy club. Pressure's on. You feel pressure when you're at the Improv, But this was a place, this was like a learning experience. There's the other people in the room, they want to learn how to be comedians too. And so much less pressure. I got on stage. I told a few things here and there, maybe some jokes that I had in my head for a long time, and then got 3 minutes, that first time. I felt great. It was a rush. And, and I, like I said, I started to pursue it and care more about that than other responsibilities that I had. And it became my source of joy. And then, of course, when I became unemployed, I had to figure out. You think San Francisco is expensive now? I mean, it was pretty expensive when I was living there. My major driver, I'll tell you this is another life lesson that I tell people all the time. So is pursue your passions, obviously. If there's something that you're really interested in and you enjoy, definitely pursue it. The other thing is that obviously we have to pursue certain things out of necessity, right? Like I got to get a job so I can pay rent. I got to pay to live. I got to eat. But when I made decisions in my life that were based entirely on that, on that aspect of it, I took these jobs solely because I had a lot of obligations financially. San Francisco is an expensive place to live. I have a PhD. That's an expensive degree to obtain. I didn't get a free PhD, and so I had all these student loans. And
$150,000.
Yeah.
Right?
And
Insane.
I think my student loan debt was my monthly payment for my student loans was maybe comparable to my rent.
Wow.
So I was like paying 2 rents every month, and I never got ahead on that, because that was just the interest. So I was in a struggling financial position. I realized though that the choices I had made in trying to fit myself into a certain category were not paying off. And if they're not going to pay off anyway, I might as well go broke doing something fun. I might as well go bankrupt trying to be a comedian. I didn't go bankrupt, but I did go broke.
I was going to say, you've done pretty well, actually. It actually worked out for you. So
it eventually, you never know where opportunities are going to arise. So I started doing comedy, and I did it for a couple of years, and I was able to bare minimum support myself, but I had to default on some credit cards. I got a lot of angry phone calls from creditors and stuff. And that was something that I just had to be okay with. I didn't do it on purpose. I wasn't trying to, buck the system or anything, but I also needed my mental health more than I needed Visa to get their money, or, you know what I mean? So yeah, that was a difficult period of my life, but I was developing my skills on stage, my humor, my presence, and it wasn't always great. Obviously we go through ups and downs. I tried doing comedy as a psychologist, hey, everybody, I'm a psychologist. You ever hear the one about the behavioralist and the, you know what I mean? Nobody cares. People expect that I'm going to do comedy about psychology sometimes, and then they see me. It's like, all this guy did was dick jokes and talk about, But I always try to make people laugh. And if I can't make you laugh by talking about psychology, then I'm going to make you laugh by talking about something else. I only call myself Dr. Brian King on stage as it sort of distinguishes me from other comedians. But it's not like I'm up there talking about psychology or anything that I'm educated in. It took a while. But then eventually I got on the radar of some public speaking bookers. And I got a couple phone calls, and they was like, hey, we hear you're a comedian, but you also have a PhD. Is that right? And I was like, yeah. And so, well, would you like to do a series of seminars, public speaking gigs? And that was like a real eye-opener for me. I was like, wait a minute, I could make a living utilizing my degree in psychology, but also trying to make it entertaining. And so what exactly we're talking about? We're talking about doing these seminars that are based in psychology. They need to be full of psychology, but make them funny, make them entertaining, so that people can enjoy the experience as well as learn from them. And I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. That's fantastic. And so I hooked up with this agency, and they started sending me around various cities to try it out. I loved it. I got hooked. And other than my student loan, my most expensive bill was my rent in San Francisco. I had just stumbled into an opportunity to do public speaking gigs on the road. And I told him, I said, look, if you can fill my calendar, if you can keep me engaged enough, I'll live on the road. I'll do do as many gigs as you can give me, and I will do them and knock them out. And they agreed to that. They saw it as a nice opportunity because most of the speakers have families, they have homes, they have perhaps maybe if it's somebody like me with a PhD, they have a practice, they're doing something that they have to, they can't really commit fully to. But I was completely open, and I love the idea of touring. So I told them that. And now they have somebody who they can book for maybe a lot more speaking gigs than they could book the other people. I gave up my apartment. I put everything in storage and gave up my apartment and committed to life on the road for a year. And I did that. In doing that, not only did I earn some money while I was traveling, because that's, the whole point, right? I was working, but also I wasn't paying money on rent. And so having been relieved of that, really helped me a great deal in being able to get myself out of that financial situation that I'd gotten into before. It opened up doors. I met people as I would travel. I would do a seminar in a town, and then I would reach out to the local comedy club and see if I could get a spot in the show that night or whatever. And it was really great.
How many years in when you started doing that?
How many years into comedy?
Yeah.
Maybe like 1 or 2, maybe.
Wow, that is impressive.
Yeah, I think, well, remember, I wasn't being booked because of my comedy. They liked that I was a comedian, but it was, I'm a psychologist, and so they needed somebody with a PhD. So it wasn't like I just went from open micing to touring the country, and it was like that, but it wasn't, I wasn't touring the improv.
Yeah, but it would have taught you so much. That's what I was thinking.
It really
time
did.
On stage.
It really did. I consider every speaking gig as an opportunity, as another stage time opportunity, regardless of what it is. I do some corporate event, or I do this or that or whatever. I mean, it's all public speaking. And it all helps you fine tune whatever it is in our brain. It helps us to communicate and helps us think on the fly and be funny. And all, of course, the various comedy club exposures that I got as I was traveling too. I mean, I would book as many comedy club gigs or even like one-nighters or do open mics wherever I could, and I managed to really just kind of get around a whole lot.
And what's impressive is there's a video online on your YouTube channel, which I think is just Dr. Brian King.
Yeah, Dr. Brian King.
Definitely go check this out. But you do a set that's 7 minutes of crowd work, and then you're like, well, I guess I should probably do a joke. But the crowd work is so good that you're just layering joke on joke on joke, and you're hitting on the ladies. Like, I was like, oh, that's smooth. But it's really, really good in the sense that, like, I feel like you're very confident on stage. Like, you've done it so much, and you're just ready to talk to the crowd. So
I love crowd work. I love to riff. And the problem with having ADD is that it's hard for me to write. And it's hard for me to remember, too. Like, I remember in the early days, I would try to write jokes. And I would write, oh, this is a good idea. I'm going to put that down, And then I would come to the stage with a set list, It was a struggle to even look at the set list. You know what I mean? Like, I would forget that I had it. I would just start rambling and start talking, and I would get it out. And finally, I kind of abandoned that. I still write jokes, and I remember them, but that's because I use them repeatedly. Like the more you say something, the more it just sticks in your head and comes out. But yeah, I really like riffing. I really like crowd work. And one of the problems with crowd work is that it's very difficult to sell that to club bookers. Like if I were to come in to this club and audition or whatever, I'd say, I come up here and I just do a whole riffing set. I might get a lot of laughs, but can I do that every night with every crowd? That's a hard thing for a booker. It's nice to have those pre-written jokes in your pocket. And so I have a few things that I usually say. And I also hate my material too. Even thinking about those jokes, I'm like, I gotta write new stuff.
That's just every comedian. Every comedian hates their material. Like at first you love it, and then you hate it, and then you hate it more, then you love it. So you go back and forth on it always. So
you spend all this time working it out. As I go to this show, and I'm just refining it and modifying it and getting used to it, and then it just sits there in your brain for when you need it. I envy people who can write really well-crafted jokes and remember them and tell them and get a good response. I have a lot of friends that I envy because that is, in my opinion, a demonstration of disciplined writing. They can show a clip, say, hey, this is my set, these are some jokes, and that'll get them a writing job on a TV show. Riffing is a little different, but in the modern age, who knows, more unscripted entertainment is out there, so there might be other opportunities. But
absolutely, and it's very natural too to you. Like you can tell that you're very comfortable in it.
The key to that, don't care. It really is. It really is. It's a hard state of mind to get into, but once you can, people talk about meditation, it's a meditative state. Once you can get into that mindset where I'm just going to free flow, trust that whatever comes out of my mouth is something good and something funny, it works. You'll chase the laugh too. If I'm riffing and I'm interacting with people in the audience or whatever, and it's not going anywhere, well then, I could go into my material, which I don't like, or I could make a joke about the fact that it's not going anywhere. And so
very self-deprecating. I noticed that too. You were very willing to make fun of yourself at any moment. With the Zach Sprung thing, with our friend Zach Sprung passed away, and the doctor did a moment on the stage, an excellent set actually, which you can watch online. It's awesome. I hadn't even talked about it on the podcast with you, but I remembered it because you came up and you're like, I'm his gay lover. And I lost it when I was watching that. And I was like, is he really saying this? And the fact that you shaved your hair into a mohawk and went the whole, you went the whole 9 yards with it was awesome. But like, did you make up most of that set on stage?
100% of that was made up on the set, stage. Now, here's the thing about that. I had the idea to shave my head like Zach did. Zach had a mohawk, for those people who don't know him. Zach had a mohawk, and he also had one of those handlebar mustaches, I had just come off of a camping trip, and so my hair was a little bit longer than I normally have. So I was going to shave anyway. Like, I usually keep my hair on my head pretty low and keep my beard pretty low. I asked my family, my wife and my kid, is like, would you guys mind if Dad looks a little silly for a couple of days, because I had this idea to do it. And I wasn't real committed to the idea. It was literally the only thing that, the only idea that stayed in my head, So I'll think about Zach, right? And I'll think about what he meant to me as a friend and a comedian, and what thoughts come around that. And nothing really was coming up. Like nothing was pushing the thought of shaving my head out of my mind. Like I was like, what can I say about Zach? What can I talk about Zach? It's like, well, I could shave my head, And so about a couple hours before that show, I just did it. I committed to it. And so I had a little help. My wife and my kid both helped shave me down to look like Zach. And now the thing about that, right? So that's a prop. I mean, I have I have a prop. I've made my head into a prop basically. And I did look kind of like Zach because I'm a big guy. He was a bigger guy. I had a Bucky shirt on. He wore Bucky shirts all the time. I come out on stage. I had no idea what it was going to say about the fact that I looked like Zach. But then it just starts coming forth, Before I got to the gig, I was thinking, well, maybe I could say like I'm his ex-lover or something like that, or that I'm emulating him or trying to take over his spot in the comedy scene, And I think all of that came out a little bit, But there was a couple of strokes of genius. When I look at that video, I'm like, oh, man, I don't know where I pulled that out of, but that was brilliant, And there was a part about me describing us as being gay lovers, and I said something about like, I called him Old Zack Attack or something like that.
Zack from the back.
And then that pops into my head as I'm saying Zack Attack, and I'm like, oh my God, Zack from the back. That's brilliant, And then I had another moment where I remembered he was from Albuquerque. And there was something that I was watching the movie Free Guy. Taika Waititi is in it. Ryan Reynolds is in it. Taika Waititi uses this line about Albuquerque turkey, and that just stuck in my head as Albuquerque rhymes with turkey. And I just remember thinking of him as the Albuquerque turkey, and they're like stuffing the Albuquerque turkey. It was just like as I had that thought on stage. I mean, it just pops in your head out the mouth, And as I said it, I'm like, oh my God, that is brilliant. That is either going to greatly offend his family or make everyone in the room just die laughing, and thankfully it was the other result.
It was such a big laugh too, and it was also pressure reliever because so many people were sad at the time because it was out of nowhere, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That we lost him, and he meant so much to this comedy community here. He did so much for everyone.
Yeah.
I would see him everywhere. I'd say twin because I'm a Mohawk too. So I'd be, what's up, twin? So it was nice to have that because you really relieved the pressure in the room.
I was really affected by his passing too. I mean, I hope that came across in the set. I mean, it wasn't just I'm going to make a bunch of jokes. I was really affected by it. I was on a camping trip, as I mentioned, and then when I came back to cell service land, whatever, I started seeing these posts. That's how I found out by somebody's posting it on Facebook, and I was like, oh my, I can't. I reached out to our friend George for confirmation, to see like what had happened. But I was really affected by it and bothered, and I really wished I could have had another opportunity to talk to him. It'd been a little while because I'd been out of the state, on the road and stuff, and we had a gig. Actually, I had enlisted him to go on a couple of road gigs with me, and that was really unfortunate. I had to recast that, but it was weird how much of an absence I felt, given that it's not like he lived in my neighborhood. You know what I mean? It's not like I saw him every day or met for coffee every day or even talked to him on the phone every day. But I really felt a big hole when he left. And so it was cathartic to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it was one of the best things I've seen in the last year or two. And for the community to come together in DFW for the comics, just to gather around that, and say, hey, we're going to pay honor and tribute to our friend. Because, I would see him everywhere, what I mean? Like, you just pop in the room, and there he is standing there. So
he was hardworking. He ran shows. He produced them. He would do everything he could to try to make it. He was a tough guy.
Yeah.
And, it's tragic that we lost him.
It is.
Hey everyone, it's just Stuck jumping in to say thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. If you dig it, please head over to our website at improvtx.com, where you can check out our calendar for all the upcoming shows in Addison, Arlington, Houston, and San Antonio. And don't forget to follow our social media, all links in the description. And with that, back to the podcast.
I want to kind of talk about how you met him in the sense of you ended up in DFW from your traveling all around. How did that happen that you ended up here?
Well, so I told you I lived on the road for a year, right, early in my career. After that, and I paid off student loans and I did, everything else that I needed to do. After that, I decided to move to Los Angeles, like settle down. If you're a comedian and you want to make any kind of success in that role, you have to either at some point move to New York or LA. That's
Right.
just a thing. Now, I was living in San Francisco when I started. My stuff was in storage. LA was an easier move. It just made a lot more sense. The weather's better as well.
Yeah.
So I moved down to LA. Got a friend of mine in a room wanted to move down around the same time, so we decided to be roommates. And I started living there. And I lived there for about 3 years, fully intended to give it my all. I really wanted to Zach Sprung that place.
Yeah.
Like I was hitting all the shows I could. I was doing everything I could. However, I still needed to make an income. That life doesn't provide an income. So of course, I'm not going to say no when the company calls and says, do you want to do these speaking gigs? And so I started doing these speaking gigs. Well, I didn't start. I started before that. But I would continue to do the speaking gigs while I was living in LA, trying to be an actor or a comedian or whatever it is that I'm going to do. And as I continued to do them, I realized I really just love the road. I love being out there, and I love doing these speaking gigs. And in doing them, like, it would take me 3, maybe 4 months out of the year, like, not in LA. I would get a call or an email from one of my profiles. I'm like, hey, we think you'd be great for this role. Are you able to come in to audition? I'm like, no, I'm in Nebraska, doing a thing. And so after a while, I just realized, I'm not actually giving LA what it requires for me, because you got to be present. You have to be present to be even considered for things. So I was willing to leave LA, and right around the same time, I met a girl who attended one of my talks, one of my seminars on the road in Florida, and we had gotten to know each other pretty well, and there was a little bit of a mutual attraction there. And she was looking to leave Florida, and she was a traveling professional as well. We were both talking one day about the difficulties in having a relationship when your income takes you on the road, and it's like, wouldn't it be great to just travel together? And I said, yes, it would be. Let's do that. And so she was like, yeah, I'm on board. And so normally I would travel with a friend to kind of take care of things. And the same company that books me also books like an on-site coordinator, somebody to manage, my events. And so I said, well, you could, take these events. You could be my on-site coordinator, and we could just be a couple together. It was a very interesting way to approach that kind of decision, but we decided to become partners in the romantic sense as well as every other sense, So she was living in Colorado at the time. I was still in LA. She flew to LA, helped me pack up my stuff so that it would go back into storage. And then we took a nice long road trip over to Florida where we packed up all of her stuff, put it in storage, and sold her house. I didn't, own my apartment in LA, but she owned a place in Florida. So we sold the house, we packed up all our stuff, and our stuff went into storage. And that's where it remained, actually, until 3 months ago. We lived on the road for about 6, 7 years.
Wow.
So. Now, the pandemic happened. When the pandemic happened, it canceled everything, right? It canceled all the gigs, canceled the speaking, canceled everything. Now, the thing people don't realize is that when I do these gigs, I get hotel room. It's not like I'm camping in my car or driving around. Some comedians do. They camp in their car, they couch surf or whatever. But, when those gigs were pulled out from under me, now I no longer have like most of my hotel rooms paid for the year. And so I have to figure out what to do because I also don't have any income. The government says shelter at home. You don't have a home, it was tough to figure out. The flip side of that, so it's tough to figure out where to live, but the flip side of that is that because we weren't committed to a place, we could technically live anywhere. We could choose based on whatever circumstances. And so we spent a couple weeks temporarily, doing what we could do, paying attention to how the pandemic played out and which places looked like they'd be more hospitable than others. I knew I didn't want to go back to LA because they were very tight on their mandates and precautions and restrictions and so forth. I knew I didn't want to go to New York. Not only were they also really tight, but all my stuff was kind of in the South. We settled in Texas because I'd lived here before, went to college here. I have a brother that still lives here. I didn't have a lot of ties to Texas, but I've never lived in Dallas, and my brother lives in Dallas. So we decided to come to Dallas. Texas was the most open place that we were willing to move to. South Dakota was open because they never closed at all. But I didn't want to move to South Dakota. I have no ties there, no reason to move there. Also, Texas was the first place to start doing comedy shows again. Yeah,
actually, we were the first club that started doing shows here. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing,
I think that's a great thing. I think that's a great thing. Somebody's got to be first. Yeah. And honestly, it's that first person who shows the rest of the world that we can do it still. Or the first person who makes a big mistake, and then, we learn a different lesson. Yeah. But thankfully, it worked out the other way.
Yeah, it was crazy. We were open at like 10%.
Yeah.
So it was like 30 tables, if even that we could do, you know what I mean?
So I moved here temporarily. I still consider myself nomadic, so I didn't empty out the storage units or anything like that, you know. We moved here temporarily during the pandemic. Being restless, I'm going to take advantage of what's going on. And so I saw postings about open mics and stuff. The first open mic I went to in Texas was this bar called Hat Tricks, which we all are familiar with. And I wouldn't say it was a good open mic. But so I'm seasoned enough in comedy and have been to enough comedy scenes in the country to know that if you're new in town, you go to an open mic. And regardless of what's there, whether it's an audience or not, the other comedians will recognize in you that there's a little bit of experience, you know. I just went in, I signed up for a set, I did a set. After my set, immediately Zach is coming up to me. He's like, hey man, how long you been doing comedy? It's obvious you're not like a fresh open micer. And George and other people, you know. And so I knew that was a quick way to establish some connections. And I met those guys, and we became friends and worked together a lot throughout the pandemic.
Because George was putting on shows left and right.
George and Zach both were putting on a lot of shows, and I would not have survived the pandemic as well as I did if it wasn't for people like Zach and George giving me something to do. I mean, really, I was terribly restless and unproductive during the pandemic. I hadn't had a job in over 10 years. I mean, touring the country as a comedian / public speaker, that's not a job. Those are gigs. I brushed off my resume and tried to get jobs during the pandemic. And, you know, people look and say, oh, so you've been doing public speaking for 10 years. So, well, how does that qualify you to do this other, you know, this other thing that you haven't done for 10 years? I found it to be very difficult.
Yeah.
You know, but thankfully, we made it through. And I do credit to some extent, you know, the opportunities that those guys gave me as being it. So once things started opening in the world, I had the opportunity to go back on the road and do what I normally do for income. Oh man, that was such a relief. It was like, oh my God, I don't know how much more of this I can endure. You know, 2 years sitting out was a lot. And so I got back on the road, and it was not full time. It was like, you know, smaller tour, less attendance, you know, that kind of stuff. I was so grateful to be able to do it. In the time between meeting my now wife and today, I had a kid. Well, you know, she had a kid. I just helped. So now we have a child, right? And when we first had the kid, people were like, you know, hey, aren't you going to settle down somewhere? Where are you going to settle down? I was like, no, we don't need to settle down. And we didn't. We took her on the road. She traveled fine. There's no problem. But once she got to school age, I knew that we would have to settle somewhere because there's just some aspects of life that I can't give her as we're moving from place to place all the time. You know, right. I want her to have a little bit of exposure to that. So we started thinking about where do we want to settle. We kind of knew last year would be the last real full touring year with the whole family. We started thinking, where do we want to settle? What feels right? There's a list of cities that we could have gone to and really appreciated. You know, we wanted to go here, whatever. And for some reason, Dallas just kept overpowering those cities. Like, we really liked it here. There's a lot of opportunities here. It's usually a warm place. You know, that's one of our requirements. You know, this freak winter weather. A couple months ago, it's literally like 2 months ago, we settled in. We arranged for all of our storage units to be unloaded, brought here, and now I guess I live here.
Yeah. Well, welcome to Dallas.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's a really long way of saying I moved to Dallas. It is necessary to, if you want to really know why I'm in Dallas, you got to understand those circumstances.
Yes.
You know, they really do fall into play.
So, I want to talk about the podcast that you do.
Yeah.
It's On the Road with Dr. Brian King. How did that get started? You were telling me about the radio.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not very creative when it comes to naming things. You know? On the road. Why? Because I'm on the road.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. When I left San Francisco, some friends of mine who had worked at a radio station, they thought it'd be cool if I submitted content every week or so for a radio segment. And so we just started calling it On the Road with Dr. Brian. You know, as I traveled from place to place, and I would interview people, and they would play them on the station. And that worked out really well. And I think I did that probably maybe a year or so. As I would travel, it would sometimes become really hard to find people, or I remember I'd go to an open mic, or, you know, I'm at a restaurant, right? And I'm like, oh, this is an interesting restaurant. Well, let me interview a waitress. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it fizzled, basically. I also didn't like the fact that once it was broadcast on radio, it was kind of gone. You know?
Yeah.
Although this station did produce podcasts of their shows. I mean, even then, I think there was a server issue or whatever. So they had to delete old shows, all the time. And so I decided that I wanted to continue it. I liked interacting with people in this forum. I like getting to know people on a more intimate level in a conversation and talk about cool things like art and comedy and whatever. But I don't like podcasts where it's just like a couple of fresh comedians talking about the open mic scene or smoking pot, while they're playing video games or whatever. And so I decided, I don't know, I don't want to be pressured to do podcasts all the time, but when I encounter interesting people on the road, I'll sit down with them or see if they will chat. And so I've been continuing that in some form or another for maybe the past 6 or 7 years.
And it's like 111 episodes or something like that.
That's including a lot of the old radio segments too. If somebody were to subscribe to my podcast right now, which you should, On the Road with Dr. Brian King, available on Spotify everywhere. If somebody were to subscribe right now and start listening, they would get a nice variety of contemporary episodes that we recorded within the last couple of years or so, and then they would hear like an episode that was recorded in 2012, for the radio show. I think I've dug out all of the old episodes that I care to post, but there's a mix, and I label every episode by the city I'm in to add that on the road element. I actually just recorded one in Dallas, and the more episodes I record in Dallas, the more I think I should change the name of the episode because it's not really on the road if I'm but I don't really care.
No, on the road works, and it's a great concept to be able to go out there and actually talk to people. I love the fact that you would go out to do your job, but then you would go out to the open mics or ask to be on shows. It's very bold because most people wouldn't do that. They'd be afraid to do that.
Well, if I only toured and did seminars and then went to my hotel or did, and got ready for the next seminar or whatever, that life would probably be just as miserable to me as my job I had in San Francisco. I need outlets. I need creativity. I need to do something more than that. And so it's tiring sometimes, because I do these seminars during the day and then I drive to the comedy club and I do the comedy show, and comedy shows aren't early, I'll be on until late, and then I get up the next day to do the seminar in a different city. It's a tough schedule. But if I didn't do it that way, I don't know that I would have continued and enjoyed it as much.
What advice do you have for up and coming comedians, people who just started out?
I don't know. Well, it depends on the nature of the advice. So if you're looking for like career advice, for example, people ask me, how do you make money in comedy? I always tell them, be funny at your day job. Find a way that you can work and be funny, because it's very difficult to support yourself as telling nothing but jokes. Most of the famous comedians we know, like they got most of their income probably from movies and TV shows and other things that they've done. Those are related to comedy, but they're not standing in front of an audience every night, Even if you're a headlining comedian, you play a room like this. I don't know what you guys pay your headliners. I mean, assuming it's a B-list or so, individual who doesn't have a whole lot of creds, doesn't have a pre-existing audience that they bring in, but a solidly funny person, Even if that's the case, I mean, 2 shows Saturday, maybe 2 shows Friday, a Sunday show if you're lucky, a Thursday show if you're lucky, and that's your whole week, that's hard to live on. It's hard to make a family and do other things. So I always tell people, if the best way to be successful in comedy is to really try other activities, use the stand-up to develop the humor and the skills, but also try to incorporate humor in anything else. Like you're a real estate agent. Be the funny real estate agent. Right. You know what I mean? Be the real estate agent that makes everybody laugh and you get recommended all the time because you're so funny. You know what I mean? If you're going to be a teacher or a professor, be the funny professor, be whatever you do, if you can incorporate that. That's a piece of advice I give a lot. As far as starting stand-up comedy or doing stand-up comedy, that's a different bit of advice. The advice I always tell people is, remember, never lose sight of this. I see this happen to people all the time. Don't lose sight of the fact that the vast majority of the audience members have no idea who you are. They didn't come specifically to see you, and they didn't come specifically to hear your jokes, So if what you are saying to them does not make them laugh, then you have to be willing to do something else. Like you have to be able to switch directions, I see people all the time who get on stage and they have a whole list of jokes that they want to go through. First joke didn't work. Second joke didn't work. Third joke didn't work. They're starting to get nervous, Is that fourth joke going to work? Yeah. No, it's not going to work. Do something else. Anything. And that's where crowd work comes from. That's where riffing comes from. You gotta go off the script, If you're killing it with all those jokes, then that's great, But it's always about making the audience laugh. It's not about trying out these jokes or reading them with a nervous voice and increasingly a higher level of anxiety, And another piece of advice I'll give young comedians: move the mic stand. Every time I see somebody on stage, they're telling jokes from behind a mic stand. It's something that takes a while for people to learn, but just move it to the side, or move your body to the side or whatever, but move the mic stand.
Yeah, and so often you see that too. Yeah, it's like, oh, why didn't they move it? You almost want to scream out, but you don't want to ruin it.
Right, exactly. I'm like, hey, there's a big pole in front of you.
Get that out of there. The last thing I want to talk about is you're an author. Mm-hmm. You have written 3 books, which is awesome because the one is simply about Bloody Marys.
I know, that's crazy.
I love it.
That's the weirdest thing. And even when I wrote it, I'm like, this is so weird.
So The Art of Taking It Easy, How to Cope with Bears, Traffic, and the Rest of Life's Stressors, published in 2019. A Field Guide to the North American Bloody Mary, 2018. And The Laughing Cure, Emotional and Physical Healing. A comedian reveals why laughter really is the best medicine, 2016. These are kind of autobiographies too.
A little bit.
Yeah, because they're kind of a snapshot of your life at the time while you're also educating.
Because I use my own self as examples of things, 2 of those books came from my background in psychology. I'll let you figure out which one didn't. But they come from my background in psychology, and they come from subjects that I do seminars on, things like, and so I did seminars on the health aspects of humor, how humor and laughter are so beneficial to us, and then of course I thought, well, this could be a great book, and I had an opportunity to make it a book. I draw from my own experiences, and so it's not intended to be autobiographical, but there is a component of that. The Bloody Mary book is Odd Man Out, and that really came from social media, my social media presence. So as I would travel, I started posting pictures of the things I experienced, and I was never a huge Bloody Mary fan, but I was in Alaska. Now, if you know anything about Alaska, they have a season, let's call it summer, I guess, where there's nonstop sun, like the sun doesn't set, It's actually really frustrating if you're a new person visiting Alaska, because I was just wired awake, 2 a.m., and I'm still walking around like it's daytime, and there's other people in the same boat. Like we're all, it's pretty crazy. You have to, if you find a hotel room that has blackout curtains and stuff, that kind of helps. But still, it's like you don't know when to fall asleep. Your body doesn't know that. So I woke up one morning real super early. And then I had nothing else to do, so I just decided to hit the road. I was going to go to Denali National Park, and I was driving overnight, but bright as day out. And, I pulled into this restaurant to get a little something for breakfast, and they were doing like a Bloody Mary special for breakfast, And I ordered a Bloody Mary, and it was served to me with a really interesting garnish, like a stick of meats and cheeses and all that stuff.
Oh, wow. Compared
to the kind of things you see on Instagram today, it was basic, but it was really tasty, and I thought the garnish looked interesting, so I had a crummy cell phone at the time. I snapped a picture of it, and that went up on social media somewhere, and wow, did it get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I would post lots of things throughout my travel, and for some reason the Bloody Mary was the big winner. I found out that Bloody Marys were kind of popular in Alaska, and so I was in Anchorage, and I went to another spot, and they had a really interesting Bloody Mary, so I did that, And as I was traveling, these ideas started hitting me. I was like, maybe I'm tapping into something. Maybe there's this subculture, Bloody Mary connoisseurs, Bloody Mary fans. Wouldn't you know it, around that time, there's a guy in Wisconsin who puts a hamburger on a Bloody Mary. It's like a garnish, and that starts being really popular. People are sending it to me. They're saying, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this Bloody Mary in Wisconsin? And I met him, by the way, and I've done a couple things with him. But around that time, I was like, wow, yeah, this is definitely something that's becoming a thing. Wild Bloody Marys, loaded Bloody Marys, or whatever. So I thought, I'm gonna go all in on this. And I started a separate account called Bloody America. The Bloody America developed a pretty decent following, actually, stronger following than I had as a comedian. And I would just travel, as I was traveling, seek out unusual Bloody Marys, interesting Bloody Marys, and take pictures of them and write about them and stuff. And I did that for a while. I put the book together because I had some time. There was a while where I wasn't doing much. My daughter had just been born. My wife took a temporary contract, so we were in Florida for 3 months while she was working, and I was a stay-at-home dad. And so I was like, well, what can I do to stay creative? Well, I have all these Bloody Mary pictures from traveling the country. I'm going to write a guidebook. And I asked my friend Emily, who toured with me, a lot during those years, and you want to help me write this? And so she said, yeah, of course. And so I put together all the photos. We did some research on the clubs and bars and things and restaurants. And we wanted to make sure that everything we published was currently open. Places close all the time.
Right.
And as we were doing that research, we had about maybe 30 or 40 Bloody Marys that we had experienced that are no longer available because the place closed or, whatever, which was pretty sad to realize. And then as we were writing it, we realized, how much value is this book going to have if places keep closing,
Right.
But I thought it was cool to put out anyway, and so I released it, and then I started getting booked in these Bloody Mary festivals all over the country. Yeah,
That's awesome.
there's this whole festival circuit. There's different cities, they have a festival here, a festival there, and so I was a judge. I was a Bloody Mary judge, and I would sell my books at those Bloody Mary festivals. I had one guy come up to me once at a festival in Atlanta, and he's like, yeah, I bought your book in North Carolina, and let me tell you, I've been using it as a checklist, and
that's
every
awesome.
single Bloody Mary you've recommended has been great, except for one. And I was like, well, yeah, it was kind of cool. There's this interesting subculture that I kind of tapped into, and I don't drink Bloody Marys anymore. I don't drink anything anymore, really, except the Red Bull, apparently. My focus in the last few years of my life has been developing healthier habits, and so drinking is a big part of that. And of course, when you drink comes with like a big fried chicken sticking out of it, that is definitely not healthy. And so I cut down on that. I actually gave Bloody America to some friends that I met through Bloody Mary activities. They're big fans of it, and they were thrilled to take it over. And they do travel a little bit as well. So they maintain that legacy for me. But yeah, it was a weird thing. And so as I travel, I take pictures. I'm a photographer. So I had just mountains. I have so many Bloody Mary pictures in my backlog, and I got to do something, And I had all these ideas to do other photography related books, but they don't sell well. It's not worth it enough to me to put it together, unless it's just something I really enjoy or am passionate about, or I had some time on my hands and I needed to be creative.
Yeah, but that's a fun and creative outlet too. There's a time and place for stuff. Eventually, everything ends, so that's fine.
But I also want to mention The Art of Taking It Easy. So that book is the follow-up to The Laughing Cure. It's about managing stress, and The Laughing Cure did really well. It's still out there. I still tour with it, and The Art of Taking It Easy did incredibly well. It's strange to me how well it did. In fact, it's translated into 6 different languages. The most recent one was Korean, and the publisher in Korea sent me a couple copies, and I just got those like a couple weeks ago, and man, it's like it bears no resemblance to anything that I produce. Like the writing is different, the language is different. I don't know if you pick it up from the front or you pick it up from the back or whatever. It just like there's nothing in there that's recognizable to me anyway. In the other language versions, like the Polish or the German, at least they use the same alphabet. So I can, when I'm flipping through, I see, okay, that's chapter 1, that's chapter 2, etc. It's really an interesting thing to know that there are people in Korea who are reading my stories about living in Texas and managing stress. And
that's pretty cool, though.
Pretty
I saw that it was in German, and I was like, right on. That's bad.
And and I just finished and submitted the manuscript to my next book, which is a follow-up to that one. I mentioned I don't drink Bloody Marys anymore because I'm trying to focus on health. And this next book is all about losing weight.
Oh, right on.
So I'm a big guy, but I was bigger. When I was traveling and basically living an unrestrained, indulgent lifestyle, I got really big, actually. I can't even admit it verbally, but it's in the book how big I got, And I've lost about 100 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And I do struggle with that. I lost 100 pounds maybe about a year ago, and ever since I just keep gaining and losing the same 10 pounds. I need to, to stay focused. I can say that I lost 150 pounds at some point. But in losing the weight and in having a decently received book previously, then I figured there was probably room for one more. And so I pitched it to my publisher. I said, would you like to publish a book about weight loss as a follow-up to stress? I talk about weight in both The Laughing Cure and in The Art of Taking It Easy. So it's consistent, it's on brand, and then I also, even in this current upcoming book, I also talk about Bloody Marys and why I drank them and why that was a major factor for me. So that's going to be book number 4, hopefully released in April.
April of this year? Mm-hmm. Very nice. Oh, you have another book that you're going to start working on after that? You got any ideas?
No, I think I'm tapped out. And if I do another book, I really don't want it to be another like psychology / humor. You know, I mean, I want to draw from something else. Like maybe I don't know, maybe write some fiction or something. It's
still impressive. As somebody who's always wanted to write a book, like that's got to be a long, hard process. Going through the editing is probably the worst part of it. But congratulations.
Well, actually, you know, I will tell you, like I told comedians, like I talked about earlier, the barrier to getting on stage as a comedian, there is no barrier. You just get on stage and do it. If I had known that, I would have started a lot sooner. The barrier to writing a book, same barrier. You just do it. And you just have to force yourself to sit down and write. And that's what it is. You know, if you have an idea, maybe you can spec out an outline. I tell people this all the time because people say, hey, I want to write a book. I'm like, well, it's just like doing anything else. You know, you want to be a guitar player, you pick up a guitar. You want to be a comedian, you get on an open mic. And you want to write a book, you just have to just sit down and start putting some words, you know. It's a labor. The editing process is difficult. I'm lucky because I have a publisher, you know, but you don't have to. I didn't have a publisher for the Bloody Mary book, and it shows.
I mean, the conventions thing is so awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, let's do social media real quick. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Dr. Brian King.
Yep.
Real simple. Everyone go follow. Dr. Brian King, thank you. Thank you for being on.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And with that said, support local comedy in any way, shape, or form that you can, and we will see you on the next one.
And there it is. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please head over to improvtx.com to check out all our upcoming shows at the Addison, Arlington, Houston, and San Antonio clubs. If you like this podcast, you might enjoy the other podcasts on the Improv TX Comedy Network. We have The Act Out. From open mics to the big stage, comedians tell us the story they've made, where I talk to comedians from all over and chat about their journey this far. Also, check out the Black Dog Retro Arcade podcast. Straight from the arcade, we talk about how our favorite games were made. That's right, we're talking all that video game goodness. And finally, we have Quacking Up, a storytelling podcast where we pick suggestions from a hat and tell stories based upon them. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Please check out our social media, all links in the description. And with that, we'll see you on the next one.